So just to briefly introduce our panel, and then what I'm going to do is give them the opportunity to share some of their perspectives and wisdom, and then we're really going to have a free discussion building on that. So first of all, and if you'd like to wave as you go by, there we've got your name tag, José Braz, who's economist based in Portugal and has been very much involved in the energy transition discussions within Portugal and the government there, part of the Energy Commission and a regulatory board. We'll hear more from José in just a moment. Neil Kermode is Managing Director of the European Marine Energy Centre, EMEC Limited, and I think you're particularly involved in a decentralised energy programme up in Orkney. I'm not sure it'll be as hot in Orkney as it is here, but very interesting to hear the challenges you're facing, particularly around the skills side of things. Then David Tuji is Community Energy Specialist and founder of the the Bristol Energy Network, one of the pioneers of saying, okay, let's seize the moment. We're decentralizing, localizing. How do we develop that energy infrastructure at the community level? And what challenges is that bringing? And again, where are the skills gap? And finally, Dr. Hélène Chiron, who's a reader in economics at the University of Bristol here in the UK. And I think looking particularly around theoretical and empirical aspects of labour market models. So it'll be interesting to hear perspectives on how this labour market is evolving. So that's our panel. Thank you all for giving up some of your precious time to be with this conversation. We will see how we get on. From my own perspective, I'm fascinated because I'm in a small village and we are part of Sustainable Marshfield, trying to work out how we can develop a local energy supply. And goodness me, for every solution there seem to be 12 problems. I know you haven't thought about skill shortages, so I have a personal interest in breakthrough within this field. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite each of our panelists to have 5 to 10 minutes just to offer where they're coming from and some key perspectives into the pot, and then we'll draw from that, having heard from all of them, and draw out some of the threads and add that in with your own contributions as webinar participants. So José Braz, first of all, you're in a sense looking at quite a strategic level. Great to have you with us and interested to hear some of your thoughts on this subject.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to the organizers for this kind invitation. My training and background is as a macroeconomist, and most of my experience is as a regulator, but in different fields, from financial services to insurance to pension funds to competition generally, and more specifically in this case to energy. So the thoughts that I'm going to start off with are from that perspective. They're very general and sort of a holistic view, since my background isn't in informatics or into the technical side. You'll excuse me if I miss out on some of the buzzwords, but I'd like to bring on some slides if I may, and you see, here we are. Let me bring that into slideshow. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, as has already been said, is skills for local energy, smart local energy. And this, we have now, I think, a challenge and an opportunity when we look forward towards a sustainable future. Smart energy, and this is a very imprecise word, anyone can call smart whatever they want, but sort of smarter and smarter energy systems have been around for decades as technology has made it possible to automate and to transfer data. So it's something, it's not a new term, but now we have a new opportunity to actually do a lot more with smart energy than we've ever done in the past. We have the EU Next Generation Plan, of which the European, also called the European Green Deal, perhaps 750 billion euros worth of funding. Its focus includes, of relevance to us, smart energy grids using 5G communications and also efficient buildings. And this gives us an opportunity because local energy systems actually are a lot more job intensive than traditional energy. Traditional energy with far away, very large generating plants, often burning up coal or gas, and then energy transmitted over thousands and thousands of miles on grids, high voltage, and then medium and low voltage until they reach our homes. But it's a very capital-intensive system, and basically at the receiving end, the consumer is simply expects to turn on the switch or off and have energy right there. And it's something that doesn't really create that many jobs at the local level. Local energy systems are a lot more job intensive. And the question of relevance to us today is, so what training is needed by and for whom? Because not only do we have more jobs, we have different jobs. So what skills are needed? And here I would divide broadly, and again, without being very precise, into sort of two large areas of skills. On the one hand, objective or sort of hard skills, and on the other hand, and in my opinion, more important, the subjective or the soft skills which are needed to go forward to our sustainable future. Now, the objective skills we need, and this is no surprise here, of course, we need people like panel installers, we need technicians to take care of the maintenance, technicians to look into our homes to see what improvements can be made to make them more energy efficient. Then as we look at the commercial side, if we have savings or demand response participation, we need aggregators to bring those small savings into a sizable enough chunk to be able to offer it to the market, and by doing that, avoiding the need to invest in much more robust grid systems. For the new energy communities, which have just recently been brought into being and transposed into national law in Portugal since the beginning of this year, in other countries probably about the same time, energy communities will require a manager and will require people who know how to deal with the allocation of the energy which is being produced and shared within the community. Very importantly, we also need regulator skills, because pro-renewable or the energy that is renewable requires pro-renewable regulations and requires grid tariffs that facilitate and give the right incentives for users, whether they be domestic or industrial, to prefer to use clean energy. So these are different skills which are needed. And who does the training? The training is done traditional format. The universities, the colleges, or just learning by doing within the companies themselves. So that's as far as the traditional or objective skills. The subjective skills I refer to as being those that require really a universal attitude change. Universal in the sense of not only the technicians who deal with providing or transporting or supplying the energy, but also the users, what is become known as the prosumers. We are no longer just consumers, but we are increasingly encouraged to be prosumers, producing and consuming energy, and therefore relying a lot less on the coal-driven power plants 2,000 miles away. We need an increased awareness of our options in terms of energy sources, and we need to know what are the implications of our choices. So this is a much broader skill mix that is needed here. And here, before going into more details, I'd like to leave with you just two sources of inspiration which occurred to me while I was preparing this. One is from a long time ago, probably the 4th or 3rd century BC. No one is really very, very sure, but it's an early Taoist writer called Lao Tzu. And one of the famous sayings of Lao Tzu is, "Good travelers leave no tracks." And I think this is something that should inspire us as we look to the future and to what we really need to do. The second inspiration is a lot more recent. It's from 5 years ago, the papal encyclical Laudato Si. And the message that I'll take from there is that we should be guardians of all nature, respecting every creature and the environment, which Pope Francis calls our common home. So caring for our common home, and this is a lot more than simply looking at animals and plants, is something that also should inspire us as we tackle this topic. So what specifically is needed to go forward? As I've said before, your old energy is dirty, but it's simple. I mean, it uses coal, it uses gas, there are losses over the thousands of miles that energy is transported, very sort of capital intensive, but it's simple. It's plug and play. We expect to just plug in our home appliance or our computer or whatever it is, and it's taken care of. We don't even think about it. It's something that just is there, and we only think about it either once a month when the electricity bill comes, and of course we always think it's too much, or if there, for some reason, and in most of our countries it's very rare, there's a power outage, and then suddenly we realize how indispensable electricity is to us. But day to day we go days and weeks and months without giving a second thought to this old energy system. Local energy systems, by contrast, and especially clean local energy systems, require more attention to detail, and we need to be more aware on a more continuous basis of different things that need to be seen to. The PV panels that shouldn't go for 5 years without being cleaned, or else their productivity is much, much lower. If we have thermal solar, here we have to ensure that the pressure of the liquid that is flowing is correct, or otherwise either it's going to be too high and most of it will evaporate, or too low and it simply is not moving. We have to control the default levels in the automated systems. If we have temperatures expecting the outside temperature to be 15 or 20 degrees, and we have our thermostats for 22, and suddenly it's 30 degrees, well, the thermostat will take care of that. But if it's colder than we expect and we actually need more heat, then probably we need to do some movement of the default levels. In short, we need to be more constantly aware of what our choices are and what the implications are of our choices. So we need an overall what Pope Francis calls an education for solidarity, which is a fundamental attitude in all our choices, be they social or political or economic. And this solidarity isn't simply alms giving or donating to UNICEF. Solidarity implies a respect towards all our environment, whether it be people or nature. And this implies kindness, it implies compassion, it implies caring for the world around us. In short, we need to travel without leaving tracks, not damaging our environment. And this, in turn, implies a universal challenge. So governments and universities and society in general, schools, social media, municipalities, official agencies at all levels, NGOs, computer programmers, and consumers. Basically, all are needed to go forward towards a more sustainable future. Now, in practice, what does this mean? It means that business school and economists, for example, need to develop and teach methods that include all costs, including the externalities in their calculation. If we look at classical theory and neoclassical theory and basically theory and then the putting into practice of this theory in terms of public policies, we're accustomed, and business schools teach us all the time, we have to look at the bottom line, and the bottom line is what results after we've extracted from the revenues the costs. And the costs are the things that we actually pay for. Now, this needs to change, because there are increasingly much greater costs than the ones we recognize and pay for. Whenever we use coal to produce electricity, that electricity is being sold in an open market, and so it's competing against others, and it's basically having to cover the actual cost, the cost of the coal and of the staff and of the grids, but it's not taking into consideration all the fumes that are spewing out into the sky and affecting our environment. This is an externality, a negative externality. But increasingly, these externalities are becoming everyday realities. And if we think back, 20 years ago, no one really cared much about what this was doing to the environment. It wasn't that obvious. Now, of course, it's a lot more obvious. But business schools and economists still rely on theories from 200 years ago that don't take this into consideration. Of course, externalities have been known for a long, long time. And Ricardo and others wrote about these externalities. However, there were things that existed in theory, like the beekeeper whose activity is not only profitable for him because he's making and selling honey, but also as the bees fly around, they pollinate, and that's also positive to the farmers in that vicinity. So these are positive externalities. These have been recognized for a long time, but we really need to bring them into our calculations, into our policies. Also, talking about policies, we need our fiscal authorities to implement tax rules that make sure that we have a just and inclusive distribution of profits and wealth, to take care of the vast majority of people in the universe that are in a state of poverty. Why is this relevant in an IT conference? It's relevant when we talk about sustainability, because it's not possible to talk about technical or simply financial sustainability without looking at social sustainability as well. And as we've seen in recent weeks, when people are unhappy or feel that there's an injustice being perpetrated, they go to the streets and they act. And it's impossible to have increasingly large disparities in incomes and in wealth without this having an impact which places at risk the whole society that we live in. So we have to make sure that the large, most of the wealth generation in recent decades has been by very large companies that have grown so rapidly and become so big and so powerful that they can convince governments in different countries basically to implement tax rules that allow them to make a ton of profit and pay virtually no taxes. Now, this has to change, and it's not a requirement that all the countries in the world agree to have the same rate of taxation. All we need to do is make sure that the taxation of these global profits is done with a distribution grid that basically says you pay taxes according to the rates in the countries where you have the sales, for example, or where you're manufacturing it. So that if Microsoft or Apple makes billions of dollars in worldwide profits, and channels it through a tax haven, so therefore paying no taxes on that profit. If it's selling iPhones in Portugal, then the share of Apple's sales, global sales in Portugal, should be the share of Portuguese taxation on Apple profits. And why is this important?
Just to kind of remember, just conscious.
Sorry, am I going too far?
So if you just want to have another minute or so, and then I'll
okay, we'll come back. We'll come back to this later.
Stuff.
I'm wasting time on this right now. Okay, and we need regulators and authorities to implement the charges and the fee structures that promote recycling and encourage energy efficiency and local generation. We need, and perhaps this is what is important for this conference, we need programmers and app developers to develop algorithms and applications that facilitate energy efficiency and gamification that encourages user involvement. As I said before, the current system does not involve users, does not involve consumers. We need to make energy sexy. We need to make it that people can, through gamification, through other forms of encouragement that people actually get involved with a purpose. And we need consumers with information on how to save scarce resources. Simple things like the installation of PV panels, better home installation, even simpler things like not having taps fully open unless they're necessary, or not having lights on in empty rooms. In short, we need to treat our planet gently because, as we know, there is no planet B. So we need to not leave tracks because, after all, it is our common home. Thank you.
Jose, thank you. That's a brilliant start for us. Many threads that I hope we're going to pick up to in a few moments. What I'd like to do is to, and I particularly like the idea between hard and soft requirements. So I'm sure we'll develop that. What I'd like to do immediately is move to the sharp end. Neil Commode from EMEC, I mean, you're delivering change on the ground or at sea and in the ground. So great to have you with us, and we'll be very interested to hear your practical experience of what's changed that's taking place and the skill requirements and shortages that that's throwing up.
Thanks very much indeed, Peter. Yes, I'm here at 59 degrees north, which is Orkney. We're nearer Bergen than we are Birmingham. We are, as Peter said, I manage the European Marine Energy Centre. The picture I put up at the start was of one of the tidal turbines in our site from a company called Open Hydro, which was running for a number of years doing experimental work. But we're trying to find ways to basically take energy out of the sea, be it waves or tides. But interestingly, one of the things that we found is that once we started on the energy journey, we found we were in some very interesting and different sort of spaces. So, for example, we found ourselves quite quickly in a position where the grid that had been installed in the 1950s, 60s and 70s to supply a small amount of power to these islands was inadequate for taking the large amount of power that we were now producing in the islands, mainly from onshore wind, taking that power away from the islands. And so suddenly we found we had to work into different things to try and deal with the energy. That led us to starting to produce hydrogen from tides. Now, the hydrogen is a classic case in point where we had a system which, hydrogen's been around for hundreds of years. Well, it's been around forever, isn't it, really? But the hydrogen technology has been around for several hundred years. But we found quite quickly that the regulatory processes that around the control of hydrogen were inadequate. So part of the skills I think we need to talk about really are not just purely in the engineering skills, and I'm a civil engineer by training, so not necessarily in the manual and dexterity skills, but they're also skills in thinking. They're skills in the perception of the regulator to see the issues that are now in front of them rather than the regulations that were written for a problem that emerged some years ago. They're in the skills of the people to imagine what could happen. And in fact, there was a quote we used to have above the door in our office, which has been modified. So the quote's not there at the moment, but it's going back up again, which was a quote from Kennedy, which we used to welcome people into the building with, which was used in a speech he gave in the Doyle, which was never underestimate that the problems of the world cannot possibly be solved by the cynics and critics whose visions are limited by obvious realities. We need people who can dream of things that never were. So some of these skills that we need are going to be softer as well as the hard skills. One of the other pieces that we have also found ourselves working into here is because we are a community that is running almost, well, on a lot of renewables, that has led us into some spaces which we hadn't necessarily expected. And that's led us to produce a project called the Reflex Project, which I'm going to show you a couple of slides on, but just 2 minutes just to rattle through a couple of points that are directly relevant. And hopefully we'll get the right screen share up. If somebody could confirm you're seeing something that says Reflex with a big blue slash across the top corner. Are you seeing that? See if
We
it's
are.
yet. You are excellent, because I'm working at which screen I'm looking at. Thank you. So this is a project that we put forward to the UK Research and Innovation, which is a a project which had been funded through the industrial strategy, and they decided to run a competition for schemes that put forward ideas for what they call profiting from the energy revolution. It's recognized there'll be a change that's going to go on, and so a group of companies, that are shown by the logos on the bottom, got together pretty much locally to then produce a proposal we put to government, which I'm delighted to say was funded. That project itself, I'm just trying to make it work, was really driven on the fact that we got problems with our energy systems, which I'm not going to go into because Jose has, I think, has covered elements of this, but principally we need to have a better energy system than we have at the moment. But the main point that I wanted to show is that Orkney is already in a position which the rest of the world is probably going to find itself in. So we came up with a mechanism that joins together the various energy uses that we have in our community. And the point is that penetrates well beyond purely electricity and suddenly starts to get into heating and rapidly starts to get into transport, because roughly half of the energy that we use in the UK goes on heat and roughly a quarter each on electricity and transport. And we have essentially decarbonised our electricity supply by doing some easy things like putting up big wind turbines. But what we now need to do is do some smart things by controlling our appliances and some of our behaviors to make the most of the energy we have in these different spaces. And that requires ICT behind it to communicate, control, predict and execute various commands that are going to be needed in order to maximize the utility we can get from the energy we have available. Because we can't turn the wind up and down in the way we used to turn up gas turbines, so we have to do something a bit different. And the point is, this project is about 50% funded by government, and we're trying to join together these various vectors. One of the most important things that we've found in this is that, say, Orkney is in a place where the rest of the world is going to follow. And this is a picture of what happened on the UK electricity grid in August last year. The green line at the bottom was the renewable generation that was going on, and the grey line in the middle was the electricity demand that was going on over a month, the month of August. And we know we're going to put more renewables onto the network. What is that going to do? Well, if we put 4 times as much renewables on the network, we'd effectively increase the amplitude of the graph on the bottom and roughly move it up 4-fold, and you'd end up with that. So that's the same generating profile multiplied by 4. And that's what the UK would expect by the time it gets that amount of renewables on the network. This is what Orkney does today. So this is what we've got with the amount of standing wind we have, and tide is putting a small input to this. We have a network which the red line is what is being produced by renewables. The blue line is what we are using in the way of electricity. And so the point is we have to have ways in which we can deal with the storage of electricity, a new skill which we don't normally have, the control of some of our behaviors, which we don't normally do. People just do what they want and the electricity network follows them. That's going to need to change a little bit. And we found that, in fact, there are things that we are doing now that the rest of the world is going to find useful. And I'm pleased to say that UKRI found that what we were going to do was going to be a useful move in the right direction. I mentioned perception. We are going to have to change what goes on, because in Orkney at the moment, a lot of people are already engaged with renewables. We have, out of a population of 20,000 people, we have something like 300 people in the sector. 500 people have got wind turbines. I have one in my garden. Houses with solar, community turbines, the whole 9 yards. And it effectively means that something like there are about 2,500 people, or about 25% of households in Orkney, have a direct link. So the point about prosumers is actually real, and it's here today. And those changes are going to mean that we need to find ways that will align with policy. And we're delighted to say that what we're doing does seem to align with the Sustainable Development Goals and policy as a whole. A couple of other little bits on skills just to finish off. One was about vehicles. I've driven an electric vehicle now for 4 years, and if you're a mechanic, I've got bad news for you. They don't need much work doing on them. The most work I've had on mine has been when somebody reversed into me. I needed the bonnet replacing and putting new tyres on it. And after that, nothing else. Well, one wiper blade. So the point is that we are not only going to need more skills, we're going to need to change skills. So we will need fewer people doing maintenance of vehicles, but we will need people who understand the finer points of the electronics and keeping these vehicles going. So there's a change in the skill set that's going to be required there overall. And the other thing we're also doing is we're seeing penetration from one industry into another. And just this one to illustrate is at the bottom are some of our ferries that are here in Orkney, and we're starting to power those with hydrogen when they tie up alongside at night, and we're doing work on putting hydrogen out at sea. In addition, hydrogen tractors will come, hydrogen buses will come. Now, the bus driver shouldn't need to know anything about hydrogen any more than he knows about diesel refining, but we will get to a point where there will be people who need the skills to make this stuff work. And finally, we're going to need better connectivity skills, because we're going to have to work with small communities in a number of different locations across the world, and our perception of where we are is going to change. And I have to say, I think COVID has done a huge amount of this, because suddenly we're all meeting on Zoom in a way that was impossible 4 months ago if you'd spoken to anybody else. And now we are all democratized into a small 2-inch square box on the screen, as opposed to you have primacy because you were in the room. So I think there are changes that are going on, and these skills are more than just the hard skills. That was all I want to say. I'm happy to talk more about it later if that's helpful. Peter.
Neil, that's absolutely fascinating, and it's in a sense it's exciting to see the future being delivered today. It's just it's throwing up all sorts of issues that you're having to encounter and solve, and ones which are coming down the road for so many others. So great insights there. Thank you very much. And we'll follow up on some of those.
Peter, I don't know how to stop sharing my screen unless that's already happened. So forgive me if you're now looking at my inbox or something.
Right. We have technical support who will do that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Or will send you a message. So I'm hoping that, there we are, look at that.
Good. Thank you.
So, I mean, continuing really neatly on the theme, David Tudgy, who's founder of Bristol Energy Network. So again, trying to convert the visions, the dreams into local reality. And the trouble is, being the first traveller, is that the snow is thickest. And so you're probably encountering all sorts of challenges in that journey. But David, great to have you with us. And again, seeing that massive transition taking place, be very interesting in your perspectives on skills required, skill shortages, and what we need to do to kind of be starting to fill those gaps. So great to hear from some of your experience.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm in my storeroom in my home in England, so thank you for putting up with. I perhaps should have tidied up a bit behind me. Yeah, no, thank you for that introduction. Yes, Bristol Energy Network, I founded with friends and colleagues back in 2009, but it didn't come into formation until 2010. And as an environmental international consultant for Parsons Brinkhoff, I had global experience working in different countries and in this country on different projects with but I was looking at it from an environmental engineering point of view, making sure that they complied. And what I found was that the local community wasn't benefiting. They weren't particularly involved in the decision-making process, and they didn't benefit at the end of the project. And more often than not, although they complied legally at a local level to air quality emissions and so on, what they hadn't considered was their global climate change emissions. And as you mentioned earlier, it's 38 degrees in the Arctic Circle right now. And that led me to really 10 years ago, in despair, really start to think about what could I do at a local level, and how could I use the skills that I do have in my community, and reaching out to friends and colleagues to start thinking about what we could practically do in our own community, recognizing that a lot of people on limited incomes were not going to be able to access the technologies that were being suggested to them as to be the solution for tackling climate change. And I think a lot of the communication was potentially unhelpful, because the route to low carbon being suggested to people was around, at the time, solar panels and things that weren't easily affordable to people. And so I wanted to change that really through passion of what I was doing. So in my free time, I set up this organization, and for 5 years I did that without any financial assistance to do so. But 5 years ago, there was an opportunity to start working on this full time. So I'll just give you a whistle-top tour of what we're doing, and just explain how this has developed very quickly for you. So I just share my screen. I just pick the right one. Yeah, that's the one. So yeah, as I mentioned, Bristol Energy Network is made up of lots of like-minded people from across the city, and what we've been able to achieve over the last 10 years has been, in spite a lot of the time, government policy and sometimes local decision making as well. So it's really an achievement of all of our communities represented in Bristol. We have a very diverse city and a connected city, but we also have massive areas of deprivation and people that are excluded from economic development and people that have that wealth. So by bringing together a network that's open and anyone can join, and we have quarterly meetings, it allowed conversation which could be directed to addressing these things. And what we found straight away was everyone had a different point of view of things. And what we wanted to do straight away was to bring those points of view so they could actually see themselves. I'm dyspraxic and dyslexic, which means that I'm not compartmentalized in my thinking. So in a way, this all makes sense to me, that this isn't compartmentalized. It actually needs to work across the board. And I think actually this is part of the new thinking that perhaps is coming through, is that actually all of these things need to be considered, and we all need to see ourselves as part of the transition, because the soft skills and the things that José was mentioning earlier is fundamental. We need to be asking ourselves as individuals around this 38 degrees around the Arctic Circle, what can I do in my current job and in my current role that relates to my own situation in reducing my own emissions and supporting my community to do the same? Because we're not going to do it as individuals, we're going to have to do this as communities, and that's where COVID-19 is actually teaching us actually how to pave differently. So I'll just give you a few examples of current work that's going on. I'm just trying to, so that's a strategy. I've got a lot of slides, so I'll just whip through these, Rob. So I just mentioned that we've been running for 10 years. We've got huge amounts of solar energy that we've been generating with our members. We've got an energy co-op in Bristol that's formed out of this network, and we've got 2 co-ops that are now generating 11 megawatts across the city, and that's the community, not even the local authority, but it has been enabled by a local authority. I'm going to skip right to the end and go back up to the top, because this is, oh, whoops. The way I see this system change happening is around considering all these things together. And because we've been doing this for a while, we've been able to develop projects over time. So I'm developing an onshore wind turbine in Lawrence Weston. So it's going to be completely community owned by one of the most poorest communities in the city. And what we've been able to do is involve them as members in the network, introducing them to the people with the right skills, and they have the people skills to be able to communicate the project to the community. And also we've been able to train people to be part of this project and identify people with those skills that live in that community, because believe it or not, we have found Concord engineers, we found engineers that live in the community that you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that community, you wouldn't expect to find that person, but they do exist. So by involving your community and talking about these skills and the skills you need, then people can start to tilt their skills. If they're an architect, they might want to start considering how they might contribute their skills to energy efficiency and retrofit. And this turbine here is one I've got in planning at the moment. It should be decided soon. It'd be the largest in England, potentially. And where we're looking at it now is going to be an area where school children can come and learn about the turbine and actually engage with the data that comes from that turbine. We've had to think about new business models and about this project. And again, that's taken different technical skills from the community of the network. And because we're an open network, we're not saying you can't come in, you can't come in. We're able to accommodate everyone's skills and hear what people want to offer. And that's been one of the benefits of having an open network. And this is the community centre that I started with in 2009. So I started with my own community centre in Easton. And the first thing I wanted to do was to make sure that I did work with my local church, but I felt like it was important that we found a building that represented the whole community. And we picked our community centre in Easton, and we looked for the energy efficiency first, looking at the energy hierarchy, and then communicating that energy hierarchy through to the neighbourhoods, and starting a project around showing what you could do in your own homes as an arts trail. So it's, again, starting from myself and out to my community. And then in the process of doing that and improving the community building, we found a local company, CPro, a guy living locally, he was interested in this sort of technology. Another guy who was a consultant, and he was interested. We did an energy audit of the building. We started to think about how we could put solar on. We involved the local authority. We started to really get into this, and we hit a lot of resistance from the local authority. And this was the first building in the whole of the city to actually have solar put on it by a third party. And it took a lot of work to do that. But once we unlocked it for the whole city. And now we're putting solar on community buildings across the city. So by involving people, engaging them, we can crowdsource skills, we can crowdsource finance. We can also bring in the political element of it, because obviously as more people get involved, more political actors start to get involved in this, and they can start championing this for you. And I think this is really something about it going beyond your local community. So what we've ended up with this project now is we've created the first of its kind in the country. We drilled boreholes. We started generating more electricity and we wanted to demonstrate that you could heat the building using an air source heat pump and things like that. So we innovated to actually not just provide electricity for the building, but also to provide heat. And we've needed skills around finance to be able to show the business models are working. We've needed skills. So as we've done these things, we've had to develop new skills and expertises. One of the problems we found is that the government in this country launched big funding to address climate change. We've got 25 million homes in this country that need to be retrofitted by 2050. And in 2010, this government put in a lot of money to actually start trying to retrofit those homes. But instead of thinking about the skills gap, they just pulled the lever and said the market will provide. And the market provided a substandard product, and it broke the trust down of communities. It broke down the trust of installers. It broke down the trust of all those people that you need to involve in the skilling up of these projects. So because they didn't decentralize that decision making, and because they didn't invest in those communities that were already engaged in this process, they siphoned the money off to large investment groups, really, that basically were able to take advantage of this. So that did cause a problem. And in response to that, the local communities responded by developing, we developed our own project, the thermal imaging project, the Cheese project, to show how energy is being lost in buildings and how we might be able to address and evaluate the quality of installation that's going on. So again, that came in from the network of having the technology people joining the network, people with experience on architectural skills, people with experience of communication skills, all collaborating together to produce a project. And this is now recognized at a national level, this project, because of this inconsistent government stop and start schemes. We have to reinvent this, and we have to take a local approach and a long-term approach, and we can't wait for governments to get involved in this. We need to take action now, and then bring government along with us. And thankfully, government is listening, and also local government's listening. And this is a new project. It's not been fully funded yet. We're just working on it at the moment, but it's about actually how we actually coordinate all of those different things in Bristol from a grassroots level, because the installers, the PV installers, the home builders, they're not part of this big lever system. So we need to create systems that aggregate those people and skill those people up so that they can actually participate. And so when we actually involve those people, then we actually can, and if the projects are run by the communities, like this wind turbines being run by the communities, we can reinvest into our communities. We can skill up those members in our community that need skilling up, and address those things. And the last thing I would say is the regulatory issues are really fundamental, because community groups are at such a small scale. They don't have the big legal access to legal firms and all these sorts of things that large companies do. So we do need people that are involved in regulation to understand how can they simplify this so that you're providing genuine access to communities so they can access this. And as Peter was mentioning earlier, that we are fighting really hard to bring this about, and I believe we are making a real difference. Just yesterday, the combined West of England Combined Authority announced it was going to put £500,000 of European money into the wind turbine project to give ownership, to give the for the wind turbine to go ahead. And we've also been able to leverage social investment bank finance into the development of this project, which had to happen in order for us to be able to develop the project. And the social investor that we worked with was prepared to lose their money if we didn't get planning permission. So that we need those sorts of instruments in place so that we can actually bring this forward, because we know what the challenge is, but we need all of these instruments to work together, because people, particularly in poorer communities, can't afford to stop what they're doing and train in something new if there's not an economic system to support that. And there are simple ways in which we can do those things if we are prepared to think about how can we de-risk this, how can we offer incentives. And if you haven't got a government that's supporting you, maybe it's about the financial institutions thinking about how they can set up trust marks and systems that will mean that they know that they'll get their money back at the end of it, but that they can set up instruments to do that. But the emergency is really now, because of the current climate of changes, is now moving to a new stage. Thank you.
David, fantastic. Not only an amazing vision reinforcing on our other two panelists, but also some really practical experience. Goodness me, the menu of skills required in that transition is lengthening, though fascinating to think that maybe some of those skills are latent. They're in community, among people. We have extraordinary human energy. We just need to find ways of actually capitalizing on that. So that'll be interesting. I want to bring our last panelists in. Wonderful. You've all spoken a little longer than expected, but goodness me, your nuggets of wisdom, I think, are very powerful. Helen Turon from University of Bristol, reading economics, and I think you kind of look at labour market models. Goodness me, we have got a huge opportunity, a transition at all levels, hard, soft, here, there, and everywhere, national, regional, practical. How does this all happen? What would you like to bring to the party, Helen, in terms of hopefully some comfort that this is going to be a sunrise opportunity and we're all going to deliver it in less than 10 years, because otherwise the whole thing's for naught anyway. So Helen, over to you.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to this. So as you said, I work at university. I work on labor market models. So I'm going to bring to the conversation a much more general angle and much more theoretical angle, which might look much less practical than the last three speakers, but hopefully will have some relevance. So I'm going to share my screen here. So I have more questions than answers, but I thought it would help to structure the conversation to sort of put in, you know, these big lines of reflections that we need to lead in order to understand what we need in order to effect this transition effectively. So what do we need? What do we need in terms of this growing sector of employment in the initiatives that, for example, David and Neil were talking about, in these new ways of using wind and the sea and nature around us to use these resources to produce energy. So we're going to need all sorts of new skills and also all sorts of old skills. So as Neil was saying, you know, in terms of innovation, in terms of finding new ways to extract energy from the sea, for example, or to find new ways to store energy and have energy supply when we need it, as opposed to when we can extract it. We're going to need some new ideas. We're going to need people who can dream. And so some of those skills are difficult to define because what they need to find, what they need to work on is yet to be defined. So this very skilled technical workforce for innovations in these different directions is one thing that is new and can possibly be recycled from all skills. But as to define exactly what is needed there, it's difficult by definition because we are looking for innovation, we are looking for new ideas. But this, of course, is going to be key in that is going to be the engine of one of the engines of this transformation. Of course, we will also need a very skilled technical workforce, and as David was saying a minute ago, we will need PV installers and all sorts of technical workforce for the practical implementations of the new technique and the installation of new infrastructure. But again, as you were saying just a minute ago, for the local project, we would also need some skilled workforce to manage this project. For example, to aggregate the skills that can be found in the community, to find those skills and to get in touch with those people who can offer some old skills in use in these new technologies. So these management skills will be needed too. And then, of course, you know, to support all this activity, we will need skilled administrative and financial and technical workforce to maintain and administer and manage financially these new businesses, which, as you say, will be more labor intensive and will also be less concentrated. José, you mentioned that, you know, the current coal and gas industry tends to rely on large capital intensive systems, whereas the local energy system will be much more spread out and much more labor intensive, and there will be a need for administering and coordinating those efforts. And as part of these small businesses, there will also be a need for semi-skilled administrative, financial, and technical workforce. So if we now look at what we're aware is already in the labor market, we have very skilled technical workforce that at the moment runs and improves existing means of energy production, who probably can recycle some of their skills into this new energy system. And we also have skilled workforce to manage these large businesses and these large, you know, energy production plants that probably again can use those skills and recycle them to the new energy system. Of course, in terms of numbers, I mean, I don't know practically. I don't have any technical knowledge of the numbers needed in the new energy systems. But as José was saying, it seems like the new systems, first of all, is going to be more disaggregated and is going to be more labor intensive. So even if we can recycle some of the skills from the declining sector of employment, there will be a number shortage in terms of these skills. And then the skills that are probably readily available in the workforce somewhere will be the skilled administrative and the semi-skilled administrative, financial, and technical workforce. So what's the time frame of this transformation? Well, it all depends on various things. And the three factors that came to my mind are, first of all, the strength of the political will to effect this transformation. Because as you were saying, for the local enterprise here and for your here in Bristol, and also for your enterprise in the Orkney Islands, a push in terms of a grant from the government or from the EU is likely to help, effect this transition. So political will is of course important of this transition. And then the pace of technological innovation, of course, is going to be important in that the horizon at which we are able to find new ways that are also cost effective. I mean, by cost effective here, I mean that they are offer a cost that is comparable to alternative energy production. So this cost is going to be related to just the cost of energy production today. But if we start including the cost of the externalities, the negative externalities of current energy production means, it will have to include not just the cost of productions, the practical cost of productions, but also the taxes attached to the emissions produced in the process. So that will have, an impact of the rate of this transition as much as the pace of of innovation related to these things. And of course, the rate of observed climate change, I mean, you were mentioning the heat that we have today. This, of course, will be also a point of pressure in pushing us to adapt more or less fast this transition. So if we see more evidence in the next months and years to come of this climate change and of the detrimental consequences of this climate change, this will push this transition and increase the speed at which we need to find the new skills for this new energy production. So it could be 3, it could be 10 years, anything in between is very difficult to predict. So there are uncertainties lying in the background, and this uncertainty is likely to persist regarding the 3 determinants above. Political will is something that is very variable. The pace of technological innovation is very difficult to predict, and sometimes there's huge leaps ahead, and sometimes we remain in at the same place for a while. And again, the rate of climate change is something that we don't know now and will not know anytime soon. So this uncertainty is likely to undermine the investments in these new technologies, in that investors will discount or will kind of calculate the expected returns from investments in these new technologies, taking into account this uncertainty. And so this remark applies as much to financial investments as much as in investments in human capital, in that when people need to invest in the acquisition of new skills, and this is going to take time and money, and people are more likely to do these things if they have less uncertainty or if they have a better idea of the expected return of this behavior. And then, where's my next slide?
Well, we only have a few moments, just to say, we only have a few moments for discussion. Yes. So I don't know whether you just want to just give us one key point, and then I want to kind of unleash the conversation. This is my last slide. So this is from a labor economist point of view, and we have a large transition in terms of what's needed and what is currently existing in the labor market. So most of the workforce, in my understanding, most of the workforce types that are listed above can easily move from one declining industry to a growing one in terms of skills. So for example, the management or the administrative, the financial, and the semi-skilled workforce can, in my view, easily recycle into this new technology. However, there's of course the usual obstacles to to workforce mobility. These obstacles, in the way that we introduce them in our models, are imperfect information on job opportunities. So it's difficult to locate where the new job opportunities are. Also, when you have a long tenure in your job in a conventional industry, you may fear a loss of job tenure and a loss of job security attached to moving to a new company and a new industry.
And of course, there's a geographical mismatch between jobs and workforce, in that if the new energy production and the needs for skills happen in different areas than the workforce is situated at the moment, that is also an obstacle to reallocation. As for the very skilled technical workforce that may be insufficient in the growing sector, the unmet demand for these could be filled either with a retraining effort of the existing skilled workforce towards these, the science of doing these things, like, for example, stocking energy and this kind of scientific innovation. We could also encourage current and future graduates to specialize in new energy production technologies, and the production of this human capital takes, 3 years for university degrees and more if they specialize. And also another possibility is to import specialist workforce from other countries. And as you were saying, because in the last few months, we've learned to work distantly and online. This may have been made easier by these latest developments. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Helen, brilliant. Goodness me, four amazing sets of insights. I really just want to go and next door, the advantage of working remotely next door, lie on my bed, close my eyes and just absorb what I've heard from you four, because I think among the presentations you've given, I think are all the insights about the skill needs and how we fill them. But we've got 20 minutes for a little bit of conversation. Oh, and just to say to everyone, I think slides with the permission of the speakers will be made available afterwards. So you really can just take a bit of time to absorb. Now, within the 20 minutes we've got left, I think I've got a big question that's rolling around in my mind. I can see an exciting, an inevitable vision for the future. Whether we go backwards towards it or whether we seize it and get it is an open thing. But there is an inevitability, it seems to me, about a transition that's going to need new players, new skills, or existing players with new skills. I'm interested, and whoever puts their hand up first can offer me an answer. I'm trying to work out whether, if we had, for one moment, visionary government that got it, that realized the transition was a pathway to a new economy, a new world, and put in place appropriate new incentives, regulations supporting this, do we have the latent skills and the skill providers who will just dynamically help us ensure we have the skills? So the vision and the framework comes from government, and then we just adjust and fill that opportunity area. Or do we have structurally some fundamental problems that we are training, and we've got a set of people who just don't have the skills for the future? So if government were to turn a button, would we be able to fill the thing, or have we got some bigger structural problem? Hope the question makes sense. Neil, a thought from you.
Yes. Sorry, yeah, I found my mute button. I think government is actually looking for ideas and things to do. I genuinely think that there is a recognition that's gone on through large parts of government, but not all parts. And there are elements of resistance, as there always are. But I genuinely think the number of people who get up in government every day and think, how can I make this hell for people, are actually very, very small. Most of them actually want to do the right thing and move it in the right direction, but often it's inertia that's the problem. So it occurs to me, there was a book by Naomi Klein a little while ago called This Changes Everything. And she pointed out that change tends to happen when there's a sort of a super saturated solution. And in fact, when the conditions are right, government has to move in behind. We don't have elected leaders, we have elected followers. They just follow from the front. And so that by definition, they are elected into the front of the group in the direction the group is pointing. So I think they recognize that if the group changes course a little bit, they have to shuffle into the front of that position. So I think we shouldn't wait for government. I think we should demand government enables the activities that we now know need to happen.
But you recognise government, in a sense, is an inhibitor at the moment.
Oh, that's very harsh. But it certainly seems like it sometimes, and it certainly seems that the regulations quite often get mistranslated and get locked down at lower levels. And often when you speak to people in the leadership positions, they're very frustrated by the fact things haven't moved, but their commands have often been translated through 40 different layers. And by the time they come out the bottom, they're completely unrecognizable from the intent that went in at the top. So I think it's up to all of us to continue to engage. I don't think they've got perfect vision. We have to help them understand the opportunity that we see, and the best way to help them do that is show them it's working. The whole thing about, well, those people who say it can't be done, please get out of the way of the people who are actually already doing it.
So quite a lot of it is working despite. Jose, I wonder, I mean, if we look at a European level, the European Green New Deal shows a pointer in the right direction.
I was going to mention 2 points which maybe give us a little bit of optimism. Of course, I agree that governments, or rather, the existing establishment, is used to things which were developed in the past, and so therefore, change is always a slow process, and it's always frustrating for those who are wanting to move more, like I'm sure all of us do. It's always frustrating that things do not move faster. However, 2 elements which I think give us some reason for optimism. One is what's happening at centralized decision-making level, namely, as you mentioned, the EU, at EU level, the Green New Deal. I think the ideas at the base of that, and of course they've been very prominent and sort of good thinking minds behind it, go in the direction of making sure that legislation in all the EU countries, at least, move faster in the direction of those objectives. Secondly, things are happening in the market, and the best motivator tends to be your pocketbook or your purse or wherever else you keep your pennies or your cents. And the fact that the PV panels just over the last 12 months have come down 25 to 30%. Battery storage has come down 30 to 40% in the last year and a half, and there's a lot of expectation about Tesla's Battery Day revealing big new ideas, namely about battery storage much cheaper because you can do it without cobalt. Cobalt is one of the expensive elements in current batteries. And a politically charged element because of its sourcing. So I think that even though things go slower than we'd like, they are moving in the right direction.
Right. Okay. I just wonder, David, whether you want to. I'm still trying to work out whether get the framework right and we've got the people, we've got the skills, or whether we have got they will emerge, or we've got a structural skills gap we need also to fill.
Well, I think there's a structural skills gap internally in the mechanism of government and the mechanism of institutions, because everyone's sort of, as I was saying about the compartmentalization of things, everyone else, you can have a brilliant incentive over here, but if the owner of that land or building hasn't been involved in that decision-making process, then you can roll right up to the point of the delivery, and then it just stops, and then nothing happens. So I think it is about making sure that the skills are seen as this needs to go across the board, and it involves every one of us, and not just the idea that this is a lever that we pull when we put money into it. Because when we do that, the big institutions benefit out of that, but local communities and local individuals don't necessarily benefit out of that. And I guess this is an opportunity to translate an energy transition that's genuinely inclusive, rather than another system that basically is centralized and a few people benefit very well, and the majority are treated as the menial people that are doing the other things. So I think there is an opportunity to actually invest more wisely by actually working with, as Neil was saying, those that are doing things already, and recognizing where those skills gaps are, that maybe we need to start working at connecting these this up as a line drawing from 8 to 80 as to where do people fit in within that process. Because going back to the prosumer argument, if you've created everything on a digital level and everything's on a digital platform, and you say to your grandma, "Are you all right with your ordering your shopping online?" She's going to tell you she can't do it. And then equally, if you ask someone who's not got a job because of COVID-19 and they can't access money at the moment, that they've got to go online and find a job, and they never actually got an education in the first place that actually gave them the things they needed, then you've just basically failed with your smart system. A good example of that is we're doing a open meeting tomorrow night on community buildings, a very expensive community building with all of the smart systems was built for the community, but they didn't integrate that with the community building people using the building. I've come along 20 years later, found out they had the wrong sensor in place for the water harvesting systems. It's never worked. The solar hot water system was never properly maintained. None of the underfloor heating system was never used in the manual this big, CD-ROMs. Nothing made sense. So I've simplified all of that, done a proper energy audit. They now have 85% of their energy met from the new solar put on top of the building. I put the right sensor in for the water. But we can come up with great ideas, but if you don't involve people and you don't treat people with respect and involve those people, I mean, I wouldn't be building a wind turbine in this country without the support of the community. And those are the poorest people, but because I've spent the time to involve them in the project over the 4 years, they've been involved in understanding the ecology of and everything. So I just really, one thing I beg of people is not just to reach for the lever and create a complex funding application so that communities can't be involved. Actually work out how can we simplify this process, because it's your builder around the corner who's going to install your PV panel. It's your grandmother that needs to use this system. It's also your disabled, we'll all be disabled possibly in our older age. So we have to think about everybody in this process. And I guess we also need to think about who owns the data, because there's a lot of people who are going, yes, click the yes, tick agree, and we don't know what we're giving away within that. So we do need institutions to understand what this challenge is and educate themselves. We're all responsible.
I just wonder one thing, all fascinating stuff. I just wonder one thing, a lot of our listeners are embedded within academic institutions, the most august institutions around the world, generally doing research work. So I just interesting looking particularly at the educational output or role of universities, etc.
Yeah.
And I just before you come in, because I kind of feel that we've had an era of the age of the entrepreneur. I'm kind of beginning to hear with sustainability, we need the age of the lateral thinker, the dreamer, the connector, the soft and hard person. And I'm just interested whether our institutions are re-equipping, or whether we've got a gap there that actually where we put our money into the education system is not delivering what we need.
I would just like to say something very quickly about institutions. So with my project, it was Bristol University that reached out to me, and actually involving the university and actually institutions like Bristol University getting involved. It does change the ability for a community to deliver something, because you're validating the community in the eyes of government as well. You're validating and also bringing experiences in, and it also allows expertise in the community to feel confident that they're going to be working within a setting that will be supporting them. So I do urge you as academics across the world to actually reach out to your communities and see whether there's a way of doing practical research, active-led research, because that's where we will see innovation and change happen if we can actually reach into our communities where capacity allows and actually translate some of these things into projects.
I'm not sure there's a university on Orkney, but now with our wonderful remote technology,
you can actually create community universities, and these can be. I've got one in Fish Ponds where I live, and you can just host a talk, and you can just have a nice pub conversation, and it can lead to interest.
Yeah, I just wonder, just whether anyone else just has a comment on, in terms of these new skills and universities and those institutions playing their part. Anyone just got anything else? Helen, do you want to offer anything on that side of things? Just a mute.
I think probably what's needed the most is some information channel to feed back to universities the need for specific skills in the new industry. And as long as information is there, then universities can modify or adapt their degrees and their learning and their advice to students as to what career opportunities are around.
Yeah. Okay. We're coming towards the end. There's a number of questions that have come up on the Slack line, although they're quite specific ones. So I think I might encourage you as panelists afterwards, if you dare to look on there and join any conversations, that would be good. I've just got an interesting one from Ian. There's an urgency. 2030, we heard from David Ferguson. He gave the figure of the number of days before it's the 1st of January 2030. If we are to reach our transition to a non or low fossil fuel carbon economy, by goodness me, we've got to scale up and transition at an extraordinary rate. And if we take specifically the city of Bristol, I mean, you are all doing amazing things. Can you just offer us some sense as to whether in less than 10 years, we can actually achieve what we need to achieve, given what you've said about the skills requirements, the new frameworks and all the rest of it? I suppose I'm asking you maybe whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, I don't know, but if you were to, maybe I'll frame it a different way, if you had one final message from each of you, we have got to deliver that transition by 2030. There is no alternative, okay? Just like COVID, we've got to deal with it. There is no alternative. Can you just offer us a final message into the pot of all the messages we've had as to addressing that reimagining, reskilling that is required? So it's almost, I'm being cheeky and asking for a one-liner. If we were to come away with 4 key messages above all the messages you've given us, that was particularly looking about that skilled transition and the move towards the local energy systems, what would your final message be? Who would like to go first? Neil.
I think Helen slightly beat me to it. Go on, you're going to say something?
No, get after you.
Be brave and get on with it. Somebody once told me when I used to work at the Environment Agency about using what we called the Jesuit principle. And that is that it's a lot easier to seek forgiveness than it is to seek permission.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I love it. I love it. Helen, you were pipped to the post by a short wind turbine blade. You next.
I was going to be much more practical about it. I was going to say identify those new skills and then broadcast information about them as widely as possible.
Right. Okay. That's great. David, would you like to go next? Just need to.
Yeah, I just think this energy transition cannot happen unless we all work together and work together at speed. And we need all social actors to take account of that, whether in our families and in our work life. So it's only until we actually try and join these things up, recognizing that the energy injustices, and it needs to involve all those skills, but we can do it if we all take responsibility.
And Jose?
Okay, I think, well, as we've said before, I mean, this is the only planet we have, so we have to take care of it. And in terms of skills, I think we all need to be involved, and that starts from school level. You're teaching children to respect the planet and to be aware of the consequences of their decisions. And then moving up at government level, I think very, very important, the regulations and the incentives have to be correct, because we have the technologies. There is so much free energy out there that just needs to be monetized in some way, and so that we use that rather than dirty energy. So I'd say yes, we can do it, but we don't have much time, and we really have to put our minds to it.
Brilliant. And I suppose my little addition would be, I just think this is the moment for the only person you can directly influence is yourself and your behavior. And it strikes me, I wear about 12 hats. I'm a facilitator up there, but I'm part of a family, a parent. I'm part of my little village community, and we've developed sustainable marsh field. I've got skills in facilitation I'm using locally. So I just kind of sense this as a moment for all of us as individuals, recognizing that actually we've got a whole set of skills that aren't just deployed in getting a PhD or learning a little bit more, a specialist thing. How can you convert that knowledge into different spheres and actually be the engine of possibility and change? Because if everyone did that, our connected communities would see the extraordinary resource, and not just from brilliant academics featured in this. So more than one hat. You're not just a researcher, you are an agent of the most exciting moment of change, but the most worrying moment of drama that there's ever been. So could I say two things? First of all, please continue the flow of conversation on Slack, and if our participants, our panelists, could find a way through, and you can check with Rosanna or Yael about how to get on there, please keep that flow going. On behalf of you all out there in webinar land, could I give an enormous thank you to our panelists for just jumping into this, giving us the richness of thoughts and ideas, some real inspiration of real ways things are changing. Goodness me, why couldn't we have done a site visit around Bristol? That would have been fantastic to see the future reality happening today.